Carna and the Boots of 7 Strides. Carna's mother was a strong woman. She had strong arms and strong legs and strong, sure hands. And she had a big heart. When Carna was 12 years old, her mother came to her and said, "Go see your father. Ask him for the skin of the brown bull. I want you to take it to the cobbler at the far edge of town. Tell him you are my daughter and that you want him to make you boots of 7 strides. Not 6. 6 is not enough. Not 8, for 8 is too many. Boots of 7 strides." "But what are they for?" asked Carna. "Why," her mother said, "they're for you to see the world and to do what needs to be done. Now go." And with that, her mother went back to work in her garden. In it were thousands of plants, not just tomato plants and geraniums and marigolds, though she had those too, but rubber plants from Malaysia and sunflowers from Italy and the lichen that the reindeer on the Norwegian tundra ate. Carna went to her father, and her father gave her a beautiful piece of tanned leather, as big as a bull, for it was the skin of the brown bull. Her father said, "Before you do anything else, go to the white cow in the pasture and tell her you are sorry to take her son. Tell her he will travel the world." And he smiled at Carna, and Carna smiled back, for she realized that she would see the world too. Carna went to the pasture and found the white cow, her head bowed to the ground, pulling tufts of thick green grass. The air smelled of spring and the wet earth. "I'm taking the skin of the brown bull to the cobbler for my boots." "I'm sorry," Carna said. The white cow raised her head and looked at Carna with her enormous eyes, and let out a long, low sigh. In the sigh, Carna heard the white cow say, "Yes, now you may go." Carna walked through the town until she came to the cobbler's house. She knocked on the front door, and the cobbler answered. She said she was her mother's daughter and held up the skin. Before she could speak to ask for boots, the cobbler held up his hand to stop her and led Carna through the house, through the front room and the kitchen, into his shop. Boots and shoes and pieces of leather crowded around him, filling up the room. The cobbler held the leather up to the light. "This is a fine piece of leather," he said. He looked down at Carna's feet and up at her again. "How many strides in these boots?" 7, Carna said. "7 is a good number," he said. "Come back in 3 days, and you will have your boots of 7 strides." When Carna returned to the cobbler's house in 3 days, the cobbler brought her in, and she found her boots sitting by the fireplace in the front room. They were the color of butterscotch. They were enormous. But when she put them on, they seemed to fit, at least until she tried to walk across the room, and then she stumbled and fell to her knees. "Ah," said the cobbler, "you need to learn to walk again." And so Carna took off the boots and carried them home. She showed them to her mother, and there, sitting on the ground amid the rows of flowers in the garden, her mother said, "Put them on." Carna did, and her mother said, "Never put these boots on unless you know where you are going. If you don't know where you are going, anywhere is fine, and you don't need them. When you put them on, you must say where you want to go, and you must speak these words." And Carna's mother said in a soft, singing voice, "1 stride for each direction, the south, east, west, and north. 1 stride for the earth that brought the living forth. 1 stride for the sky, the moon and sun o'erhead, and 1 to bring me home again to sleep in my own bed." She made Carna repeat the words over and over until she learned them by heart. And when her mother was satisfied that Carna knew the words, she asked, "Now where do you want to go?" "Well," said Carna, "how about to the front gate?" "Then it's to the gate with you. Go." And in 7 steps, 7 strides, Carna walked across the yard into the gate. Then she turned and came back in 7 strides. "Where next?" asked her mother. to the well. And in 7 strides, Carna walked across the yard behind the barn to the well. Once again she walked back. "This time to the oak tree on the other side of the field," she said, a smile spreading across her face as her mother watched. Once again, in 7 steps, she crossed the open meadow to the oak tree and back. "Now," said her mother, "you have your boots of 7 strides." For the next week, Carna practiced, each time saying the rhyme, saying where she wanted to go, and reaching her destination in 7 strides. Further and further she went each day, until one day she came to her parents and said, "It's time for me to leave home." Her father simply nodded, as if he had been expecting it. Her mother rose and went to the kitchen. She returned with a wineskin and held it out to Carna. She said, "This is the milk of the white cow. Take it with you on your journey. It will keep. When you have gone as far as you will go, take this and give it away, and then come back home." Carna placed the skin in her pack. On the next morning, she put on her boots and stood in her yard with her parents at the door. She said, "1 stride for each direction, the south, east, west, and north. 1 stride for the earth that brought the living forth. 1 stride for the sky, the moon and sun o'erhead, and 1 to bring me home again, to sleep in my own bed." She looked at her parents, waved, and said, "Take me to the next village." And she began her journey that day, with 7 steps to the next village. In the days that followed, she traveled on, until one morning she stood high on the hills that she had once seen in the distance from her parents' house. Her homeland stretched out before her, already far away. Then she turned and continued over the hills to the next country. For weeks and months Carna traveled on, each day awakening, deciding where she wanted to go, reciting the rhyme, and traveling there in 7 strides. Sometimes Carna slept at an inn, sometimes at the house of someone she had met along the way, and sometimes out under the stars. As she traveled, stories about her spread, stories of a girl in large boots who walked with the wind. Some said they had seen her traveling by them on a day when she was only going a short distance. But some said they only felt her go by, for on the days she traveled great distances, people noticed only the breeze she created as she walked by them. One night, Carna stayed at an inn and shared a meal with some other travelers. After the dinner, they sat back in their chairs and traded stories of their journeys. At last, when it had grown silent, one man who had been quiet spoke softly. "Ah, but the country I've been to, I've never seen another like it," he said. "For in that country lives a giant, a huge creature with 3 eyes, 2 in the front and 1 in the back. And the one in the back is terrible. It never closes. So you can't come up from behind the giant, for he always sees you. He comes out at night and stalks the roads and countryside. One night I heard him roaring and bellowing as he passed by where I was sitting. Why, the whole earth shook." Another traveler said, "I've been to that country, but I left as soon as I could. It's a sad thing to see a whole race of people so terrified." Carna asked, "What does the giant do? Does he eat people or destroy villages? What will he do if he finds people outside?" Both men shook their heads. The first answered, "I don't know. No one I met had ever known of a person being caught. You see, they all run inside and lock their doors at night, and none go out into the light of the morning." "And where is this place?" asked Carna. "Far to the east," he said, "over the mountains that look like clouds on the horizon." The second man answered, "Yes, it's so far that it seems to not be in this world but another." A breeze blew through the window by the table. The candle flickered, and the room was filled with the smell of lilacs in early summer. Carna knew where she wanted to go. The next morning, up with the sun, Carna had a breakfast, and wearing her boots of 7 strides, stood outside the door of the inn and spoke the rhyme. "Take me to the mountains in the east," she called out. And that day, in 7 long strides, moving more swiftly and surely than she had ever traveled before. She walked towards the mountains. As she went, she saw the mountains grow larger and larger, rising to meet her. And on the 7th step that day, as the sun set behind her, she reached the foot of the great mountains. As night fell, the mountains turned dark above her, except for their tops, blanketed with snow, which shone like a silver fire in the moonlight. The next morning, she arose and headed over the mountains. She could feel the air growing colder and colder as she climbed higher. She looked below her and saw eagles circling on the wind, which howled through the canyons. On the 4th step, as she crossed over the peaks, she looked down and saw a long green valley stretched before her, sprinkled with villages and farms, forests and roads. On her 7th step that day, she reached the valley and found herself in a grove of tall pines. She was in the land of the giant. When she woke the next morning, Carna did not put on her boots because she didn't know where she was going. She walked until she came to a village, and when she came across a man walking the other way, she stopped him. "Excuse me," she said, "but could you tell me about the giant who lives in this country?" The man's eyes grew wide, and his brow creased, and instead of answering, he walked by her at a hurried pace. She asked the same question of the next person she met, but this woman only turned from her and ran inside her house. Wherever she went, she received the same response. It seemed to her that the country and people had no soul, or that the heart of the land was hidden from view for fear it would be taken. She walked through village after village, and everywhere she went, she was greeted in the same manner, until she came to the city at the center of the kingdom, and there, at the center of the city, was the castle of the king and queen. Carna reached the castle and pounded upon the door. A guard answered her. "State your business," he said. "I've come to see the king and queen about the giant. It's important." Carna was ushered into the throne room. Carna could see the king and queen seated at the end of a great room. She walked towards them. The king spoke. "Where is this person who wished to speak to us about the giant?" "It is I," said Carna. The queen called out, "But this is a mere girl. What does she know? What can she do?" The king said angrily, "Do not insult us. Guard, take her away, now." The guard grabbed Carna by the collar and pulled her across the room and through the halls of the castle until she was shoved out the back door. The door slammed and locked behind her. Carna sat on the curb of the street by the back of the castle and watched the sun set behind the houses of the city. The people moved silently about, attending to their business. But when the clock in the castle tower struck 7, the people hurried to their houses, skirting like small animals. Carna could hear the doors being barred and saw the shades being drawn tight, so there was no light to be seen in the city. As the sky grew darker and the stars came out, Carna sat alone in the streets of that city, far from home, and wondered what she should do. Then she felt the earth rumble beneath her, with a rhythmic shaking that grew stronger and stronger until she could hear the sound of footsteps, which shook even the walls of the castle. Carna raised her head and looked up, and off in the distance, coming closer and closer, she could see a dark shadow sweeping towards the city. As it came nearer, she heard a roaring and bellowing along with the footsteps. It was the giant. Closer and closer he came, until he reached the edge of the city, and there, when he came to a small hill, the giant sat down upon it, put his head in his hands, and moaned with a long, mournful sound. Carna reached into her pack and pulled out her boots of 7 strides. Reciting the rhyme, she said, "Take me to the giant." And in 7 quick strides, she went through the streets of the city to its edge, reaching the hill. There she stopped, standing before the giant, a rough and weathered creature, and called to him. The giant raised his head from his hands and saw a girl standing before him. His brow furrowed. "How did you get here?" he said brusquely. "You could not have come from behind me." Carna shrugged, and even though her heart beat so loudly that to her it sounded as loud as the giant's footsteps, she answered, "It doesn't matter how I've come, only that I'm here." The giant pushed to see everything. I can see at night, and I see those trying to move behind me and fool me. I see them, and they cannot trick me. I don't trust them. I see them. Carna said, "Your eye behind is powerful." A change came over the giant's face. He held his head in his hands and looked up again. "That power is a curse," he answered, "for the eye never closes, so I cannot sleep. That is why I walk the roads at night." Carna looked up at the giant and realized something that no one else had. The giant was miserable. Then she said, "The eye must come out." Before the giant knew what was happening, Carna had called out the rhyme and said, "Take me to the top of the giant." She began climbing up the side of the seated giant, up his leg to his waist, onto his back, climbing and pulling until she reached his hair, which hung down below his shoulders. Carna began to pull herself up by the giant's hair. Roaring, the giant reached back with both hands, trying to grab hold of Carna, and swung his head back and forth, trying to shake her loose. But Carna was quick and strong, and she held on, climbing until she came to the back of the giant's head. There, holding on with one hand, she reached up to the giant's third eye with her free hand and pulled and pulled until it came free and fell to the ground. Holding onto the giant's hair, swinging back and forth high above the ground, Carna realized that she had gone as far as she would ever go, and remembered her mother's words. With one hand, she reached back into her pack and pulled out the skin that held the white cow's milk. She poured the milk into the eyeless socket, and the wound healed instantly, leaving only a faint pink scar. The giant calmed and became silent. Carna swung down on the giant's hair to the shoulder. The giant looked down at Carna, feeling behind his head. "My eye, I can't see. What's behind me? What's there? I can't see. What's behind me?" Carna looked up at the giant's enormous, bewildered face and answered, "Nothing but your fears." Then the giant lay down upon that small hill and fell asleep. Carna climbed down and walked across the road to where the eye lay, dull and lifeless. She knelt down, picked it up, and put it into her pack. The next morning, people found the giant sleeping at the edge of town. They stood at a great distance from where they saw him walking. But after a while, they saw that he was not dangerous and came closer. In time, one of the townspeople crawled into the giant's hand, and although the giant could have crushed the man's life, he did not. Carna was called to the castle, and there she explained what had happened. The king and queen stood up from their thrones, knelt before Carna, and apologized for their rudeness. "Stay," said the king, "and I will make you protector of the kingdom." "No," Carna answered. "Ask the giant. He will be your protector. It is time for me to go home." Carna walked out of the throne room. Servants and others lined the halls as she reached the castle doors. Outside, a huge crowd parted as Carna walked into the street. There, she put on her boots of 7 strides, spoke the rhyme, and said, "Take me home." Over 7 days and nights, around the rest of the world, Carna traveled homeward. On the 4th night, as she crossed the deepest ocean, she opened her sack and let the eye of the giant drop into the black waters. At the end of her 7th step, she reached home, and in the garden she found her mother, who to Carna's eyes somehow seemed older and softer, not quite so large and strong as before. When Carna emptied her sack into the garden, it held only seeds and earth from around the world. Carna's mother picked up the seeds and carried them to her garden, where she planted them. Carna built her own house, close to her parents' home, and in it she set a huge fireplace. When all was finished, she built a large fire on the hearth, took off the boots of 7 strides, and left them there by the fire. And if Carna is still there, so are the boots of 7 strides.